we go.
And I have to acknowledge that here.
Today is 21 January 2025. It's my distinct honor to have with me Dr. Buchholz, Dr. Horst Buchholz, who is the uh, in charge of the music program at the Cathedral of Detroit, uh, formerly the director of the Cathedral of St. Louis, and now in Detroit. And is that the Cathedral of the Blessed Sacrament?
That is the Cathedral of the Most Blessed Sacrament. Yes, I'm the director of sacred music for the cathedral and for the Archdiocese of Detroit as well.
Right. And we're here because you recently lost a friend.
Yes, I mean, many of you may have heard that the longtime president, Dr. William Mahrt, president of the Church Music Association of America, passed away on January 1st. And that was a huge loss. Although Bill was way in his 80s, he will always be missed because he was such a wonderful person. I mean, I would call him a gentleman, a scholar, and a friend.
Yeah. Man, it seems like it was just yesterday. I can't believe it's already 21 days ago.
Yeah, and Bill and I, we served as president and vice president for the Church Music Association of America for over 18 years. And I spoke with Bill before Christmas, and uh, um, um, I didn't even remember that it was 18 years. I thought it was 15. Bill corrected me. He had a better memory than I do. I says, no, it's been over 18 years. And I said, Bill, I think there should be term limits. And he said, there should be, but there are not. So, but it was a wonderful time to serve with him because he was such a unique person. I mean, someone who was a scholar and professor at Stanford University for so many years and definitely knew the aspect of a musicologist and historian looking at all this music. But then on the other hand, he was also a man of faith. And to put that into the context of his work, because outside of the university, he was also the music director at St. Anne's, a parish that he had served for many decades, 50, 60 years or something like that. And it was just phenomenal that a lot of the music that he had talked about in his classes, he was also able to put back where it came from in the context of a liturgy with an all volunteer amateur choir. That is even more remarkable.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot that we could say about him. Maybe we should approach this in a chronological, if we can, try to get everything covered. So, do you remember when you met him?
I met Bill, and he always wanted to be called Bill. I called him once Dr. Mahrt, so just call me Bill. And he was just such a human being that was quite unique. I mean, if I needed to find three adjectives to describe him, I would call him noble, yet humble and gentle. And the first time we met was probably about 20 years ago at a colloquium of the CMAA in Washington, D.C. And we both were just attendants. He did not lecture. I was not teaching or conducting anything. We were just in attendance. And the then president, Father Robert Scaris, uh, um, retired, I think maybe 1 or 2 years later, and he basically appointed Bill as the president and asked me whether I would serve as the vice president. And I had no idea what that entitled. And I said, well, what does the vice president do? I can see what the president does. And Father
Was this
Scaris in
conversation
his
in English or German?
no, the conversation was in English. And Father Scaris said, well, it's like in Washington, D.C. The president gets shot, the vice president steps in. Hardly unlikely for the CMA. And those of you who know him definitely can hear him say that. And I says, okay, I'll do it. And so since then, Bill and I served for the Church Music Association for many years and worked together many summers during the summer colloquium, but then also outside of that, we kept in touch as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I was going to mention later, but it's just interesting that I kept all my emails from him because they're something that you want to hang on to. They're
Hmm.
always carefully written. They reference a whole bunch of valuable stuff. You may not understand it at that moment, but you'll come back to it 5, 10 years later. It's still valuable. He seemed, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming he wrote to all of you the same way, but that's when he wrote to me, it was always something that I wanted to hang on to.
Hmm.
Because again, it led you down all these different avenues of study, and so I still have those, and I'm going to go back to them, probably the rest of my life, because again, I just couldn't process everything he said immediately. Um, and yeah, I mean, his responses were always very thoughtful, you
Well,
know.
he was a scholar, and especially his knowledge of the Gregorian chant repertoire, plus the early music polyphony, was really phenomenal. Whenever I had a question about this piece, and isn't there some? Oh yeah, 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 and look there and look here, and he was always like the professor that could give you advice at any time. But again, as I said earlier, not just as a scholar. I mean, this for him it was not just music theory and history, but for him it was music that was living in the liturgy that it was written for, and he really was very adamant to preserve this music, and that must be said. He preserved this music in the Novus Ordo. So basically, what the Church Music Association of America was about when it was founded after Vatican II, with the words of Vatican II, to preserve that treasure of inestimable value, to preserve this great history of sacred music and preserve it in the liturgy. So that was, I think, his quest, and that was very similar to what I grew up with when I grew up in Germany and studied sacred music in Berlin. And so in that we understood each other very well.
Mhm. Well, I know he was active obviously in the 60s, in the 70s, and so forth. And you just have to wonder, I mean, without the internet back then, no email, no internet, you wonder how I mean, a lot of, not a, I shouldn't say a lot. Some of the emails that we dealt with, he would mention in passing various people that he knew, like I say, in the 60s, 70s, and so forth. You just wonder how you get to know somebody back then across the country without email. I mean, I suppose you could send in your articles snail mail, but on the other hand, if it's not accepted, then you just have to sit there, or you don't want to be submitting to multiple publications. So it's interesting. I mean, he must have had times when he met. I'm not going to go through all the people that we've talked about and so forth, but let's just put it this way: they didn't live in San Francisco. And
No, very true. And
I suppose the
of course
telephone. I
now
guess
this.
I guess they would have had the telephone.
Yeah, this of course now dates me a little bit. I mean, email only became popular when I was a student at Indiana University working on my doctorate. Prior to that, and even after that, there were a lot of people who still were not familiar or uncomfortable with email, and writing a letter and putting it in an envelope and putting a stamp on it and putting it either in your mailbox or bringing it to the post office was the normal thing to do. And of course, I mean, today we are used to scanning documents, making PDFs of whatever, and just exchanging those. I'm still looking for that hymn, by the way, Jeff. But
Familiar
back
with
then,
PDFs, yeah.
it was really a hard copy. I mean, I mean, even when I did my doctoral dissertation on the on an opera by Franz Schreker, I needed to have a huge score, orchestral score, several scores actually, because they were very big, full scores, mailed to me in boxes. I mean, that was the only way you could exchange music. And so I think Bill Mahrt certainly is of that period where it was a major effort to get to manuscripts, and people actually traveled to see manuscripts that would not be able to view otherwise.
Do we know potentially what happened to all of his letters and his correspondence? What will happen to
Well,
that?
that I'm not so sure, but I think the last thing I heard when I spoke with him that he was going to give his personal library to the Norbertines there in California, and they were very interested in preserving that because they have a wonderful collection there, and he was very close with the
Not his
abbot.
letters though, like his all those letters going back to the 50s and 60s.
That I don't know. That I don't know. It could be part of the
Yeah,
estate
we should
also.
find out
Yeah.
about that.
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, the reason I say that, I mean, obviously, again, I think Bill obviously came through a very difficult period in the church, and I'm sure he had, a billion experiences that some of which he shared with us, some of which I'm sure he didn't. But I remember another person of his generation was telling me about the situation in Wisconsin, and there was somebody they had all these advisory committees, with the council before the council started and then after the council started. And as you can imagine, a lot of those people they were named to the committee, but they had nothing to do with it. I mean, they're living in America, decisions are being made in Rome, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, one of these people that was Bill, it wasn't Bill, but it was his generation, right? That
Hmm.
generation. And he told me about this situation where he finally went to the priest in charge and he said, "What's happening? All this music is not approved and we're supposed to get it approved. And what's the deal? I mean, are we taking this seriously or not?" He said, "Are we?" And the guy pulled the letter out of his back pocket and it was from Archbishop Bunini. And
Mm.
it basically said, anything that you want approved, send us by mail and by return receipt. In other words, in those days you used to get a receipt that your thing was received. And he said
Ah.
that receipt will count as the approval. So just the fact that you send it to us, boom, it's automatically approved. And that was, as you can imagine, a very difficult conversation for this person because he'd been trying to follow the rules. In other words, that's not an appropriate review process to simply say to
No.
somebody, send me a letter, and the fact that it's acknowledged as reaching my office means it's approved. That's game playing, right? And that was, there must have been a lot of that happened, and somehow Bill, as you say, maintained his peace, right?
Hmm.
His his. I mean, I never saw him angry. I mean, he
No, no, no. I think at his funeral, one of his choir members says that he could occasionally get angry, and I thought, really, I never saw that either. But then, of course, I think of the scripture where it says, "Your anger lasts but a moment." So I think that was probably more his his demeanor, and even in board meetings when sometimes there it was. A little getting a little excited or so. He always kept very calm, and that's why I said a man who was really gentle and noble. I mean, he would never give that up. I mean, that was kind of his personality and admirable.
I think if we examine most of the people that we like, if you think about the people that you like, it's usually people who are good listeners,
True, very
who
true.
listen to
Yeah.
what people and from what I can tell, he was a very good listener.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And it wasn't that he didn't have anything to say. It's just my from what I observed over whatever 15 years or however long I knew him, he tended to listen first and then later on if they want his input. And I think that that's so rare in musicologists because if you've ever been to any of those symposiums or colloquiums for musicology where they read their papers and they hope that the new grove will accept it. That's kind of their big life goal is to get something in the new grove or whatever. But they read the papers, and if you notice, next time you go, notice this. All of the musicologists will stand up and raise their hand, and the first thing they'll do is they'll spit out everything that they know about a topic. And then at the very end, they'll say, and so my question is, in other words, they're so eager to share everything that they know about a particular topic. And with Bill, it just seemed like he was, first of all, he would listen to people.
Hmm.
Again, it's not that I mean, he knew more about any of this stuff than any of us in the room. I mean, I don't know, was it your impression that he was a really good listener?
Yes, and of course, I mean, any professor or so that has not only worked as a teacher, lecturer, but also as an advisor. has to deal with students and listen and learn what their ideas are, and then discuss that if it makes no sense or something like that. But you definitely have to be very open as a good teacher to what the students bring to you. And so he definitely had that experience. And he taught for so many years that I said to him, that definitely, when I met him, he was already well in his 60s. So he had definitely a lot of experience as an academic and as a church musician. I mean, that is a unique combination.
I remember just a few weeks ago, I emailed him about something. I mean, very recently, and I mentioned several things, and in essence, he responded, and he was actually correct. He remembered the name of this one particular deacon, and I did not. But he said something like, You're probably right, and I'm probably wrong. My memory is gone at this point," and so forth and so on. But he was absolutely correct. And
No, his memory was brilliant. I mean,
those things that make me think he must have been a really good listener. Because
mhm.
again, I went back and checked, and he was absolutely right on the money. Um, and I feel bad that I mean I thought I did my research before I emailed him, but I guess I didn't do it well enough. But you know, but no, he was, in spite of his apology, he was absolutely right on the money. And yeah, it's very, not every musicologist is like that.
No, no.
No.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that he told me that I'll never forget, I asked him if he ever got nervous during performances.
Hmm.
And he basically said, I think I can remember it verbatim. He basically said, when I first started music, he said I would get so nervous. I would get so
Hmm.
nervous. He said I couldn't even function. I was just so nervous. And he said, and then I realized I can't go on like this.
Hmm.
This is not going to work. In other words, just getting so nervous that you can't even. And so he said, so right at that moment, he made the decision, this is not working, so don't be nervous anymore. So that was kind of a logical approach to it, I guess. I mean, and that seems a wise statement, right? I mean, if you're running around with your like a chicken with your head cut off, you're probably not going to live very long.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he always seemed at peace. I mean, that is something that I would definitely say from my impression. And of course, if you become nervous in case of a performance, I mean, that the old idea of performance anxiety, whether you are a soloist or conductor or so, I mean, 50% of that can be fixed by better preparation. I mean, that's always my advice when I taught students, be they organists or conductors. I mean, the better you know your part and the music, the score, and transitions and what have you, uh, uh, um, the better you will be prepared and the less nervous you will be. Now, I cannot imagine that Bill would have gotten nervous during a lecture because that is something that I think he seemed to do with so much confidence. But always, again, a very humble perspective because he was definitely someone who believed what he was preaching. And so I think that showed in all the presentations and lectures that I've witnessed.
Well, and of course, that's the thing about being a performance, people who are performance majors, right? I mean, like people who are in scholarly work. This is what my teacher told me years ago. He said, look, these people, they prepare a document, right? A thesis or something, and they work on it for years and years and years. And it's proofread by various people. And finally, at the end, they turn it in, right? They turn in that paper and they're done. Not so for performers, right? I mean, after all this, they have their doctoral recital, 2 hours, 3 hours of memorized music, obviously, concert music. With pianists, we had to do it by memory. I don't know if organists always do it by memory, but man,
It depends on the school. I mean, some schools do make the organists memorize their music. Um, it has merits. But on the other hand, I've always said, I mean, the organists that work in a church, for them it's much more useful to have sight reading skills because usually after they play one Sunday and they only have like 5 or 6 days to prepare the next set of preludes, postludes, anthems, hymns, or whatever they need to practice. So to learn things quickly is more useful than memorizing them.
Well, and the only point he was making is that, after 4 years, 5 years, 6 years of study, this is your doctoral recital, and you may have, your stomach may be upset that day, or you
Right.
may have a headache, or you may be going through something personal, and all these other factors that the academic doesn't have because they just slide that paper underneath the door, and they're done. And so I
Right,
mean, I'm sure
right.
there's pros and cons to each, and it seems like Bill. I think he mentioned one time that he was a pianist at one time.
Well, I don't know about that, but he was definitely a very competent organist, although I've never heard him play and he never spoke about that. But he was the organist of his church as well. There was not a second musician that played the organ. So he played, I don't know what kind of music, but he definitely played the preludes and postludes and organ literature of all sorts of
Because
things.
unless I think I remember him giving a lecture and he talked about how he became very good at playing the piano at one point, Beethoven sonatas and Chopin ballades and so forth and so on. That led me to believe, uh, I don't know his history in terms of, whether he was an instrumentalist or a singer or anything like that. That's
Mhm.
interesting. So you never heard him play a note, huh?
I never heard him play a note, no.
Interesting. That's interesting. Well, like I say, you've sat in with so many times really quickly before we go here. Um, Give us something, give us a nugget that we wouldn't know otherwise. Just you being there with him, I'm assuming for hours every year, right?
Right, right. And um, I think his personal faith is probably something that was the most amazing thing to me. So that he really treated all this music that he had learned over years as a scholar as something that was part of the worship process. So musical prayer when it was sung in the liturgy. I mean, it is so different. I mean, we all have heard fantastic professional groups singing a Palestrina mass in a concert, but it is always missing something because, first of all, I don't think that these masses, as wonderful as they are, there should be heard en suite. I mean, there needs to be
One
something
after the
between.
other.
Well, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. I mean, even the movements. I mean, between the.
No, I'm saying like no break between the Sanctus, no break between the Gloria Creed, right?
Yeah, that
Is
they
that
were
what you mean?
never intended to be heard like that. So even as a musicologist now, speaking as is, no, there needs to be some sort of a palate cleanser. I mean, I've when I've done, I mean, Renaissance masses in concert, I would insert some a piece of chant in between those, just to clean the ears. We skipped the sermon, but then between the credo and the sanctus, also something they're not meant to be heard attacca. That is so in a concert.
Or yeah, maybe some organ music would work too, like an elevation piece or
Also,
something.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
That's
And I
reminds me
think
of my favorite. You mentioned you don't have a sermon. In one of the old journals, well, actually Bill's old journal, Cecilia, before it was Sacred Music, it talked about the low mass. Oh, you still there? Oh, sorry. It talked about the low mass, and it said, they used to sing hymns all through mass during the last gospel, during the readings and everything. And one of them said, hey, make sure to stop singing hymns during the sermon because the priest may be asking for money. So,
that's wonderful.
yes, you could have sermons though, right? Lessons and carols would have
Well,
readings.
that's not a mass.
You're
That
right. You're right. You're right. You're right. But I'm just saying in terms of you're talking about where they start and they sing literally the Kyrie followed by the Gloria followed by the Creed followed by the.
Yeah, I've never enjoyed it. I mean, even a completely different texture when I have done a Mozart mass with orchestra in a concert. I usually insert like one of the Mozart epistle sonatas between the Gloria and the Credo, just so that you don't hear the same texture of that SATB choir plus soloists or so in the orchestra continuously for 20-25 minutes because it was not conceived that way.
Yeah. Okay, so the prayerfulness is really what
That
stands out.
distinguished it, and I think that that is something that we shall always receive as one of the messages, in addition to the many wonderful musical lectures and liturgical reflections that Bill has given over the years. I mean, in his sermon slash eulogy at Bill's funeral, Archbishop Corleone said something wonderful. Um, and I think I memorized that sentence. He said, "Let not the darkness of our mourning overshadow the brightness of the many gifts that Bill has given us over the years." And I think that that was a wonderful sentence to take home. And while we will all miss him dearly, I think we will remember so many things about him and things that he has said and done that he will always be with us in that way.
Well, again, my condolences. I did obviously meet him, but nowhere on the level that you did. So we'll continue to pray for him. And thank you for, just taking a few minutes to just to reflect a little bit about, you know, what it was like. I mean, it's kind of the passing of an era, right? I mean, it's not that easy to encapsulate. So
Very true. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
my pleasure. God bless.
You too.